Last week, the House voted to add over $32 billion to the Pentagon's budget, bringing the total amount of funding for the fiscal year to a whopping $782 billion, adding an additional $13.6 billion in aid for Ukraine.
According to a new Gallup poll, Americans have mixed reviews of defense spending. Americans are essentially split into three camps. 32% say there is too little military spending, 31% say too much, while 34% say it's just right. This according to a February survey. British journalist and editor of Harper's magazine, Andrew Cockburn, is with us now to discuss. Andrew, welcome.
Good to be with you. Good morning.
And Andrew's the author of the great new book, Spoils of War. And I'm curious when you saw that February poll saying that basically 2/3 of Americans are either comfortable with the amount of defense military spending that we do, or would like to see more of it, whether that comported with your understanding of how the military-industrial complex has slotted itself into American public opinion.
Well, sad to say, it is no surprise. They've worked so hard and so successfully to plant the notion in everyone's heads that more money equals more defense, better defense. That I guess we should. It's sad, but it's no surprise that 2/3 of the American public are okay with that. The essential point is, of course, that more money does not equal more defense.
And obviously, if the public is that divided on the question, there's no pressure then within the government to spend less. The pressure coming from the insiders, from the machine, from the contractors, et cetera, is always to spend more. There would need to be significant, overwhelming sentiment among the public to not do that, to counteract those, special kinds of pressures. So the fact that doesn't exist, doesn't it just suggest we're going to continue to get increased military spending over and over and over again?
Unfortunately, yes. As I think you pointed out, that $782.5 billion figure was actually more than the Pentagon asked for originally. I think they were very happy to accept the extra money and probably expected to get it. So I think the only way you're ever going to change things, if you point out or get the message across to the public that they're being had. That this, as I said, the more money does not equal extra defense. For example, they're spending, buying yet more F-35s, a plane which the Pentagon is very keen for us not to know, the Air Force is keen for us not to understand, at its very best is only capable of carrying out its wartime missions just over half the time. And for some of the versions, 6% of the time. This is pathetic. And it's also outrageous that they should be telling us, that we need all this money to defend the national security of the United States, when actually they know themselves very well that it does no such thing. And I think that's the message that has to get across.
Well, now it's an industry, and so they can't cut the jobs. A lot of Congress people don't even want to cut those jobs, and so there probably is an expectation that this budget will just continue to increase and increase, especially as pay raises are needed and whatnot. But where does this lead us? So if we're not going to be able to get rid of this budget or pare it down a bit, I worry that this is how empires fall, right? That they just continue to spend so much money on military and continue to allow the people at home to wallow in not being able to pay their bills and not being able to have, nice quality of life, building up the middle class. So where do you see this leading us? Do we just have to suck it up and live with the military industrial complex, or what?
Well, if you want a cautionary tale, take a look at the late Soviet Union. There's no question that, for years and years, the military industrial complex over there ruled the roost. And they added more and more weapons contracts. And as we know, they were giving out those contracts not because the military necessarily asked for them, or certainly didn't need them. I mean, I think they had 18 different kinds of missile systems and so forth. It was to provide jobs, to keep employment up. And the end, so they went on pouring money down the hole, and that led in a major way to the whole thing collapsing and falling into smithereens with effects that we can see all too vividly today.
And if you were kind of brought into the Pentagon procurement room and said, Andrew, tell us where we can cut $500 billion or $100 billion, what would be the places that you would go to first? You talked about the F-35, which is hilariously inept, but what are some other systems that you would target?
Well, I mean, 100 billion, pretty easy. You can, this whole nuclear modernization program that Obama launched in 2010 to give us, a whole new ICBM, a whole new US Air Force bomber. That alone, I think, is going to come in at 200 million a pop, 203 million. That it's easy. We don't need any of those things. We certainly don't need a new ICBM. We don't need actually any ICBMs. Since if you need a nuclear deterrent, we've got the submarine launch missiles, which are perfectly adequate deterrent. We don't need any of that. I mean, for that first 100 million or first 100 billion is pretty easy. I mean, I would go higher than that to get a better defense. I mean, it's the thing is, the argument is always couched as well. We just need to spend the money on, social programs, on healthcare and so on. Well, we do need to do that, but I think particularly progressives ought to understand, get it around their heads that that they can win the defense argument too, because it's very clear that most of the money, or a huge proportion of it, is just being pissed away into, for reasons that have nothing to do with defending the country.
This Gallup survey was conducted in February. I wonder what the news of the last 2 weeks in Ukraine, how does it shift public opinion when there's an active conflict going on and the mainstream media is very not exactly pushing us into war necessarily, but very very much in a kind of scared of Russia and something has to be done and that sort of thing. Would that tend to make the public even more willing to swallow massive military spending?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's not an unintended result. The media loves war. Media people, correspondents love war. It's where careers are made. It's one of the big lessons of the wars of the last going back to any war you care to mention. So there's been absolute rush to sell the war, to sell the idea of defense. Any lessons that might have come out or were available from our last few wars, which didn't end so well. I mean, I'm talking Iraq and Afghanistan, speedily tossed overboard. And, there's massive enthusiasm, which will be translated into, more demands. And you're seeing this in the Congress. There's a story today about how the Congress is pushing, a more warlike stance on Biden, who actually, I mean, I'm glad to say, is actually trying to hold back a bit. I mean, the administration can see that, for example, getting more actively involved in the war in Ukraine by doing this airplane deal or talking about a no-fly zone, all that is complete madness. I mean, it'll expand the war, which they are keen, I'm glad to say, keen to stop. And of course they should be, because more war means, for a start, many more dead Ukrainians. But there's such a sort of blast now of propaganda, of war propaganda, by so many interested parties, the military, the contractors, the press, and translated through into the Congress, bipartisan, that I feel we're on a very slippery slope here, and people, I really hope some people at least, try and call a halt and stop and think about it a bit.
And in what ways are you seeing the weapons industry capitalize on this invasion, on the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Because just as a reporter in my inbox, I'm seeing a ton of pitches from PR consultants for the weapons industry bragging about how their particular weapons are so effectively being deployed. And do we want to get on the phone with the vice president of whatever for whatever weapons maker? Are you seeing them kind of use this moment to say, look, see, these things really do work?
Well, yeah, I mean the Raytheon with the Javelin missile for sure. Although I'm really interested. I haven't yet seen any reports from the field of how well. I mean, a friend of mine in the defense business said to me, if any good comes out of this, at least we'll have a decent operational test on the Javelin missile, which is the anti-tank missile. I mean, so far I haven't seen it. Obviously, Ukraine, if it wasn't working so well, the Ukrainians wouldn't say so because they don't want to, diss whatever the US might be sending them. But I mean, I'm also seeing stuff from, these sort of, I think, pretty sort of outlandish schemes for directed energy weapons, which is complete stuff of science fiction, which no one's ever even showed a way that they can properly work or be in any way feasible, for Navy systems, only can be used, thousands of miles from Ukraine. As I say, I mean, I always think back to, I've quoted this many times, but in the first winter of the Korean War, half the casualties were from frostbite, US casualties from frostbite. Why? Because we hadn't bothered to give them adequate boots. So they'd having to raid Chinese enemy trenches to get very boots. Meanwhile, we were spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on strategic nuclear bombers, which were of no point in the Korean War, but was great for the aerospace industry. And that's what's going to happen again. Well, I can guarantee you the bulk of spending that'll come under the label of Ukraine will actually have absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine and probably very little to do with combat.
We need a stronger boot lobby here in the United States.
Surely.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
The book is called Spoils of War, and we will have more rising right after this.